Amara had always known silence. It greeted her in the mornings before the roosters crowed, lingered around her steps as she fetched water, and wrapped around her voice when she wished to speak but didn't dare. She was the daughter of the late Leone, once the most respected healer in the village of Amuru. But Leone had died giving birth to her, and the honor her name once carried faded like mist once Chief Nduka, her new husband, claimed leadership. Amara, barely out of swaddling cloth, became his ward, his burden, his project. Chief Nduka was a man of order and tradition. He had 3 sons from another woman, all rowdy and arrogant, but Amara received none of the warmth or indulgence they enjoyed. She was expected to be still, useful, and obedient. The villagers pitied her but never interfered. After all, Nduka was chief. His words sat on everyone's tongue like bitter cola. They might not like the taste but they dared not spit it out. On the eve of her 15th birthday, Amara swept the compound, careful not to stir the red dust too high. Her stepfather stood near the baobab tree, sharpening a blade with slow, steady strokes. She watched him, unsettled by his silence. He had said nothing to her all day, and yet his eyes kept following her like a shadow she couldn't step out of. That night her sleep was broken. A drumbeat sounded far away, though there was no festival. Her dreams were full of whispers and a thudding in her chest that wouldn't still. She awoke before dawn, pulled by something she couldn't name. She stepped out into the cold morning air, her breath clouding before her. Chief Nduka waited. He stood beside the ancestral stone, where oaths were sworn and blessings given. A small fire crackled nearby, barely enough to warm the dew-drenched ground. Without a word, he beckoned her forward. "Your mother bled for you," he said. "Now you will bleed for your purpose." Amara froze. He reached for her left hand, his grip firm, unrelenting. The blade glinted as it rose and fell, slicing across her palm. The pain was swift, the warmth immediate. She gasped but didn't cry out. Her blood dripped onto the stone. Chief Nduka dipped his fingers in it and marked her forehead with a crude symbol. "It is done," he muttered. "What is done?" Amara whispered, but he was already walking away. She sat alone, pressing her palm against her wrapper. The wound pulsed, the blood thickening between her fingers. Around her, the village slowly awakened, but the moment between her and her stepfather stayed with her like smoke caught in her throat. Later that day, villagers approached to give her wooden bracelets and tiny pots of balm, tokens of blessing for a girl becoming a woman. They congratulated her, praised Chief Nduka's sacred rite, saying it was an old custom for girls with strong futures. But Amara had never heard of it before. No other girl bore a scar like hers. When she asked the old midwife Mama Ezen about it, the woman flinched. "Some wounds are given, not earned," she said vaguely. "Mind your silence, child." That night Amara couldn't sleep. Her hand throbbed, but more than that, something burned inside her. When she closed her eyes, she saw symbols, etched in blood, glowing softly in the air. She didn't know what they meant, but they called to her. Over the next days her wound refused to heal. Though she wrapped it carefully, the cut remained red, never scabbing over. Sometimes the blood would beat again, bright, thick and slow, without cause. And when it did, strange things happened. Once, her brother's dog, always hostile, whined and bowed before her, tail between its legs. Another time, a child who had been sick for days touched her hand by accident, and rose the next morning with no fever. The villagers noticed. Whispers began. "She walks with sacred blood," someone muttered. "Her mother speaks through her veins," said another. Chief Nduka dismissed it all. "The girl is being dramatic," he said. "She'll stop bleeding when she learns respect." But Amara knew better. Her blood had never been her own, it had been awakened. One afternoon, as she sat under the baobab tree tracing her scar into the dirt, a young girl approached her. She had a bruise across her cheek and fear in her eyes. "My father, he says spirits make me lazy," the girl murmured. Amara didn't know what to say, so she simply took the girl's hand in hers. When she did, a warmth spread through their joined palms and the girl's breath slowed. "Thank you," she said simply. It stopped hurting. When she left, Amara looked down. The dirt where her bleeding hand had rested now bore strange markings, symbols like the ones she saw in her dreams. They glowed faintly before fading. Amara began keeping a small cloth notebook hidden beneath her mat. Every time her wound bled, she captured the symbol it drew in the soil or on stone. With each mark, she felt a story unraveling, a story that didn't belong to her stepfather or his rituals. It was her mother's voice. She remembered tales the elders told of Leone, how her hands could heal wounds, how her voice made the dying smile. She had been more than a healer, she had been a keeper of old laws. Laws spoken not in courts but in the body, the blood, the bone. And now Amara bled symbols. One day she traced a mark on a rock and felt it pulse beneath her fingers. A wind rose from the east, warm and wild, rustling the branches around her. The scar on her palm tingled. She was not cursed. She was being called. But called to what? Chief Nduka grew uneasy. He saw the way people looked at Amara now, no longer with pity but with caution. And in some, with awe. He tried to bind her to chores to isolate her, but she slipped through his commands like water. He beat her once more, brief, sharp, but when her blood hit the dirt, a crack split the ground beneath them. That night she found a rock outside the house etched with the same symbols her blood drew. She traced them and felt a voice in her bones. You are the ink of what was silenced. Write what must never be forgotten. The next morning she returned to the ancestral stone, the same place she had been marked. She stood there, palm open, blood dripping. The villagers gathered, drawn by a force they couldn't explain. Chief Nduka arrived, furious, demanding she leave. But she dipped her finger in her blood and traced a symbol on the stone. It glowed. The villagers gasped. And then she spoke, softly, clearly, and for the first time with power, "This is my law." The ground rumbled. A new law was being written, not with parchment or ink, but with truth that could bleed and still rise again. And Amara was its beginning. The days after Amara bled upon the ancestral stone were filled with a strange quiet. Not the silence of peace, but the kind that follows a storm no one admits happened. Her stepfather said little. He watched her with narrowed eyes, calculating, cautious. As if waiting. As if measuring a clock only he could hear. But it wasn't his silence that unnerved Amara. It was the silence inside her own body, the way her wound throbbed without scabbing, the way her skin itched not on the surface but deep within the blood. Each night when she lay down to sleep, the whispers began. At first they were nothing more than murmurs behind her eyes, so faint they felt like wind brushing through tall grass. She thought them to be dreams. Or perhaps just the echo of the villagers' chatter, which often took root in her thoughts. But as the nights passed, the whispers grew clearer. They had no mouths, no tongues. But they knew her name. Amara, they breathed. She jolted awake the first time it came clearly, sitting up in the dark, the mat damp with sweat. Her palm pulsed, warm and red again. She peeled off the cloth bandage and saw blood glistening like it had only just been spilled. She pressed her palm to the dirt, trying to soothe the heat. When she lifted it, a symbol had formed there, sharp and elegant, glowing faintly. She stared at it, heart pounding. Her fingers trembled as she traced the lines in the soil. It was the same symbol she had seen days ago in a dream. That night, the wind whispered through the cracks of the hut. It carried fragments of words. She remembers. The law. The root speaks. Words that seemed both ancient and intimate. Her name was spoken again, but not in fear. In recognition. Something had awakened. By day, the village moved on as if the ritual had been nothing more than a birthday blessing. The children returned to playing in the dust, the elders to sitting in the shade muttering about land and goats and the price of yams. But they looked at Amara differently now. Some nodded at her in solemn respect. Others turned their faces quickly. A few muttered prayers under their breath as she passed. The women no longer invited her to grind cassava with them. The healer refused to sell her herbs. And the market women wrapped their wares tightly when she drew near. Still no one said anything directly. No curses. No accusations. Just avoidance wrapped in fear. But Chief Nduka's silence was the heaviest. He watched her like a trap watches the animal it waits to spring upon. He gave no punishments, no lectures. Only stares, long and assessing. He stopped sending her on errands. Stopped speaking her name. And Amara felt it in her bones. He knew something had been triggered. And he feared it. In the evenings she took to walking beyond the village toward the edge of the old woods. There, beneath the thorn trees, the whispers grew louder. And her wound bled more freely. She began to bring her notebook, recording the symbols she saw in dreams and those that her palm left behind in dust, bark, or stone. No two were the same. And yet together they seemed to form a kind of language. A map that wasn't for direction but for meaning. One night, while curled beneath her mat, she dreamt she was standing in a room made of roots. They pulsed like hearts, alive and ancient. On the walls, symbols glowed in crimson and gold. In the center stood a woman, tall, robed in vines, her face hidden by mist. "Blood remembers," the woman said. Amara took a step closer. "Who are you?" "You," the woman replied. Amara awoke gasping, and this time her palm wasn't just bleeding, it was burning. Not with pain but with light. She lifted her hand and in the darkness of her hut, it glowed like an ember under skin. The symbols she had drawn were etched faintly on her palm itself now, as if they had been hiding there all along. She stumbled outside, needing air, needing space. The sky was full of stars. But as she stood barefoot on the cold earth, she realized something startling. None of the nearby animals were making a sound. Not the frogs. Not the crickets. Not even the restless night birds. Just silence. And her heartbeat. And the whispering. She heard her name again. But this time it didn't come from within. It came from the shadows behind the trees. Amara turned slowly and there, just for a moment, she saw a shimmer like moonlight dancing on water. A figure stood there then was gone. No footsteps. No trail. Just the scent of wildflowers and a breeze that made the trees bend toward her like old friends. The next morning she told no one. Who would believe her? Who could she even speak to? Mama Ezen? The old midwife had already begun looking through her as though death had already marked her. Her half-brothers? They laughed cruelly when she passed, whispering about how their father had burned the curse into her. And Chief Nduka? He had begun locking the ancestral house. But Amara wasn't afraid anymore. The fear had become something else, something deeper. A knowing. A stirring. Each night the dreams became more vivid. The root room returned and with it, the mist woman. She began teaching Amara symbols, not with words, but by lighting them in the air and pressing them into her wound. Every time she woke, one would be etched on her skin for a moment, glowing before fading. She memorized them. She practiced drawing them with charcoal, with her fingers in ash, with her blood when the wound opened again. The whispers told her stories, of laws buried under chiefdoms, of women who once ruled with symbols of light and truth, of bloodlines silenced because they made the wrong people uncomfortable. You are the last note in an ancient song, the voices told her. But if sung loud enough, even the old stones will remember the words. The ground around the village began to shift. Small things. Roots sprouting in odd patterns. Carvings appearing on rocks overnight. Dreams shared by other girls. Dreams of fire, of blood, of Amara standing beneath the moon with eyes made of stars. One girl confessed to Amara, trembling, "I dreamed you touched my heart and I remembered how to breathe." Another swore that Amara's shadow had walked beside her at night, humming. The villagers said nothing, but the tension thickened like a thunderstorm building under the sun. Then one afternoon while sweeping the compound, Amara caught her stepfather staring again. But this time he wasn't just watching. He was afraid. He stood by the gate, arms crossed, jaw tight. His eyes locked on her hand, which was unwrapped now, openly glowing in the fading light. The wound bled slowly, thick drops landing on the dust like punctuation. "What did you do?" he asked, voice hoarse. Amara straightened. "You did it." He stepped forward, voice rising. "That ritual was to bind you. Not to, this is not what was meant to happen." And yet it did. He raised a hand as if to strike her, but froze. His eyes widened and he stumbled back. Where her blood had touched the earth, a symbol glowed. It pulsed once, then again, and then it vanished. He looked down, saw the mark vanish into the dirt, and backed away like a man seeing a ghost. "Your mother?" he began. But he stopped, and turned, and walked away. Amara stood alone, her hand warm, her heart steady. The whispers inside her were no longer faint. They sang, not of fear, but of return. The morning came gray and stiff with judgment. Amara could feel it in the air before the first rooster crowed, the weight of unspoken rules pressing against the thatched roofs, the brittle leaves, even the bones of the children still dreaming in their mats. The law of silence had never been written on paper. It was stitched into glances, carved into gestures, passed down in sighs and caution. In her village, women were water, meant to nourish, not speak. They could sing lullabies, yes. They could wail in mourning, chant in celebration. But never speak in council. Never question a chief. Never ask about the sacred scrolls kept locked beneath the floor of the council house. And yet Amara asked. It happened on a morning heavy with dust. The village was gathered beneath the shrine tree, where elders debated the year's planting season and the spirit's mood. As they muttered and puffed their pipes, Amara stood just outside the ring of men, her hand bandaged in fresh linen, her eyes like fire behind clouded glass. They spoke of drought, of goats birthing still, of angry ancestors and confused signs. And then, softly but clearly, Amara asked, "Why do the women not read the sacred texts?" A hush fell like a dropped plate. The elders looked at one another, then at her, as if unsure they had heard correctly. A woman, No, a girl speaking in the circle. A question in her mouth. And not just any question, one that pierced the root of things. It was Elder Juma who spoke first, his voice like gravel. You are not permitted to speak here. But I bleed like those who wrote the laws, Amara said, her voice level. I dream the symbols. I see them. I feel them. Why should the law not speak to me too? Gasps scattered through the crowd. Some women covered their mouths. A mother pulled her daughter back by the wrist. Chief Nduka rose slowly, his face unreadable. Amara, he said in a voice that tried to be calm, you are still recovering. Your tongue has grown too wild since the cut. It is the cut that opened my eyes, she answered. That was all it took. Before the sun had reached its height, Amara was dragged before the shrine altar. Not for execution. No, the village would never stain the shrine with blood for such a crime. But punishment had to be visible. Memorable. She was made to kneel on stones, hands bound behind her back. Her stepfather stood beside the elder priest, holding the leather rod. For questioning the order, he said coldly, for speaking where no woman should, for daring to name herself in the same breath as the law, you will be reminded of your place. The first strike landed like thunder against her back. She didn't scream. The second came sharper, splitting skin. Still she bit her lip. On the third, her blood touched the shrine floor. And something in the shrine trembled. A clay bowl cracked in the altar's base. A crow screamed from the tree above. Chief Nduka stepped back, suddenly unsure. But the punishment continued. By the time it was done, Amara's robe clung to her in blood-soaked folds. Her hair was tangled, her hands shaking. She was left by the roots of the tree, alone, while the elders returned to their council as though nothing had happened. That night, Amara's dreams were filled with books. Not the books of the village, none had those. These were older. Bound in bark and hide, written in lines of gold and red. She walked among them in a great hall with no walls, where moonlight flowed like river water. She reached out and touched one. Her wound opened. Blood spilled onto the page, and the letters shifted. Changed. Not erased. Rewritten. The words glowed crimson. Where silence is law, truth becomes rebellion. Where law is chained to gender, the chain will rust and break. Amara gasped, waking in the dark. Her back ached. Her hand throbbed. And beneath her mat, the earth was warm, pulsing. She sat up and pressed her palm to the floor. The glow returned. Symbols spiraled out from her skin, like light bleeding into clay. She drew them in charcoal, memorized them, whispered them back to herself. Each one came with a feeling, a law reborn. The next day she did not go to the shrine tree. She sat beneath the fig by the stream, drawing symbols on stones, leaves, the backs of her hands. And the other girls began to come. They came in pairs in silence. Sat near her. Wash. Is it true, one whispered, that you can write the laws now? I don't write them, Amara said softly. I remember them. From books. From blood. At night the dreams deepened. She walked beside the mist woman again. This time the hall of books was not empty. Women stood beside each shelf, priestesses, lawmakers, seers. All of them silent. All watching her. One stepped forward, placing a hand on Amara's shoulder. You are the page. I don't understand, Amara said. You carry the laws inside you. The village buried them. Your blood has unearthed them. The dream ended with her standing in a circle of fireflies, her palm open. The air filled with chants in a language she had never learned but somehow knew. When she woke, a dozen symbols were scrawled across the wall of her hut, written in dried blood. She didn't remember writing them. Days passed. Women began whispering among themselves more boldly. One girl copied the symbols onto her skirt hem. Another painted one into her bedroom wall behind her parents' back. Amara began to teach them, not by speech but by drawing in dust, letting them trace the lines, feel the rhythm of meaning. One night, a group of girls gathered beneath the fig tree. Amara sat before them, her palm bleeding faintly again, and told the first law aloud. Voice is not a gift of gender. Voice is the birthright of breath. They repeated it after her, and the tree's roots shifted beneath them. The next day, Elder Juma found the symbol drawn on the path to the council hut. He scrubbed it with his foot. Burned sage. Prayed. But the next morning it returned, glowing faintly. Chief Nduka grew restless. His eyes lost sleep. He began pacing the compound at night, murmuring things to himself. This cannot be happening again, he muttered one dusk. Not like her mother. Amara overheard. That night, she pressed her palm to the earth beside the shrine. Show me, she whispered. And the dream came quickly. Her mother stood in the great hall, younger, radiant, hand glowing. She was reciting a law, surrounded by elders. Then came shouting. Flames. Chains. She had been silenced. Not by spirits. By men. The law of silence was not born of gods. It was a weapon. The next day Amara stood in the village square. Blood dripping gently from her palm. The crowd gathered slowly. She lifted her hand and spoke, not with loudness but with certainty. I reject the law of silence. Gasps again. Murmurs. But the ground trembled. The shrine tree shook. A scroll fell from its top branch. When Amara picked it up, her blood soaked into it, and the letters changed. No one moved. But something deep beneath the earth awakened. The women came forward one by one. The first stepped beside her. I reject the law of silence. Then another. And another. Even the old midwife, bent with age, raised her chin. I reject the law. And the fireflies swarmed. They danced around Amara's head, glowing brighter, forming symbols in the air. It wasn't a rebellion. It was a remembering. They had been silenced too long. Now the law was speaking again. The moon was thin that night, sharp as a blade, silver as memory. Amara moved like mist, quiet between the huts, her feet bare, her breath shallow. She knew the paths well now, every twist between yam gardens and sleeping courtyards. The village was her body, she knew where its wounds lay. Tonight she would reopen one. The shrine loomed ahead like a silent sentinel, built from black clay and bound with old fig roots. Its doors were shut tight as always, sealed with a carved beam inscribed in a forgotten dialect. Only the elders carried the key. But Amara had no need for keys anymore. She carried her own. At the base of the shrine, where roots clutched earth like ancient fists, she knelt and pressed her bleeding palm against the soil. The same cut, never fully healed since her 15th dawn, pulsed with quiet fire. Blood seeped into the shrine's foundation, and the beam above gave a low creak. The door unlatched. Inside the air was thick with centuries. Smoke from old offerings still lingered. Bones of birds and shards of calabash lined the shelves. But Amara moved past them without pause. She had come for one thing. The drum. It sat at the far end, beneath the ancestor masks, wrapped in red cloth and hidden in shadow. The talking drum, Nkiru's drum, named after the first priestess of the old stories. Amara had only seen it once before when she was a child and had peeked through a crack in the door during festival rites. Now she stood before it. It was smaller than she remembered but more alive. Its skin glowed faintly as though waiting. She reached out and paused. Her heart thundered. The law of silence had begun to crack, but this was something else. She placed her palm on the drum. It drank her blood. The sound was immediate. Boom. One low note. Then another. Not with her hands, she hadn't struck it. The drum played itself. The rhythm was slow like breathing. Then came the voice. Female. Thick with power, yet tender as firelight. You are not the first. Amara froze. You carry what they tried to bury, the voice continued, resonating through the drum, vibrating her bones. You bleed with the wound of our erasure. Welcome, daughter. Who are you? She whispered. I am the echo of the law before it was broken, the drum said. The sound they silenced. The first voice of your bloodline. And then images spilled forth, not as dreams but memories. A great council long ago. Women seated in equal number to men, their palms dyed with red dye, not from punishment, but from power. Each law passed was sung into drums, recorded not with ink but with beat and body. Nkiru, the first voice, stood among them. She was not silent. She was the law. But they feared her, the voice said. Feared that balance meant the end of their control. So they turned to shadows. To blood. Images twisted, men in robes gathering beneath the shrine tree. Sacred herbs burned in secrecy. A drum defiled. A scroll rewritten. Nkiru's name scratched out, replaced by the first male high chief. Amara's chest tightened. Your stepfather is of that line, the drum said, descended from the usurpers. Their power is stolen, passed through rituals of silence and blood. The wound they gave you, it was not a test. It was a seal. To keep the truth from awakening. But it awakened anyway, Amara whispered. Because you were born of both lines, his and ours. And the blood remembers. The drum began to pulse faster now, matching Amara's heartbeat. There is more, it said. Look. The shrine walls shifted, revealing new symbols. Not painted. Burned into the clay. Hidden laws. The law of balance, the voice said. The law of echoes. The law of unwritten truth. all buried beneath the law of silence. Amara traced one with her fingertip. It burned bright, responding to her touch. "You must bring them back," the drum said, "or their lies will become your people's future." She stepped back, overwhelmed. "How?" she asked. But the drum had begun to fade. Drums do not write. They resound. It is you who must write what we resound. The last beat echoed like thunder. Then silence. Amara stood there, hands still bleeding, breath sharp. Behind her, something stirred. She turned. Her stepfather stood in the doorway, eyes wide. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Chief Nduka said, "So the blood woke you too." Amara stared, cold fury rising in her throat. "You knew. I hoped it would skip you. You cut me to bind it. To contain it. Why?" "Because your mother wouldn't let it go," he hissed. "She was like you, full of questions. Full of fire. She found the drum too." Amara stepped toward him. "What did you do to her?" Nduka didn't flinch. "I married her to silence her. Then I buried her voice beneath yours." "But it wasn't enough, was it?" "You fed me lies," Amara growled. "I fed you survival. The village runs on silence. If you break that, everything burns. Then let it burn." She raised her palm. The blood glowed. The drum behind her answered with a low rumble. Nduka stepped back. "You don't understand what's coming," he said. "The council. The ancestors. The gods. You are not just challenging me, Amara. You are challenging history." She looked at the drum, then at him. "No," she said. "I'm correcting it." And with that, she walked past him, out into the night, blood still dripping, fireflies gathering at her heels. The shrine door slammed shut behind her. Days passed, but the wound in Amara's palm remained as vivid as the morning her stepfather had opened it. The skin never scabbed. It glistened, tender and red, pulsing like a second heart in her hand. She wrapped it in cloth, pressed leaves against it, even sang healing songs from her mother's tongue, but nothing stopped the slow, steady weep of blood. She learned to hide it. She wrapped her hand with woven thread and palm bark, claiming it was a burn from the cooking fire. The village women believed her, though they looked at her with something deeper than pity, something like fear. Amara had always been strange in their eyes. Too silent. Too sharp-eyed. Now they looked at her like she had teeth beneath her skin. But the bleeding did not pain her. Not like it should have. The ache was not in the flesh, it was in the knowing. The knowing that something inside her had opened and could not be closed. She tried once to scream into her bedding at night, pressing the cut into the dirt floor, hoping the soil would drink it all, bury the red truth. But the blood only shimmered brighter under the moonlight that poured through the hut's cracks. And then one afternoon the blood wrote. It was after a long day spent carrying water. Her hand throbbed in a rhythm that matched the drumbeats still echoing in her mind since the shrine. She walked to the edge of the yam fields where the earth broke into scattered stones, those old river-flat rocks that the village children once painted on during harvest festivals. She sat on one, breathing heavily, her bandage damp again with fresh blood. She unwrapped her palm and stared at it. Still open. Still red. She let it drip. One drop. Two. The third hit the stone and hissed like hot oil. Amara flinched. A thin line burned into the rock, dark as coal, smooth as writing. Her breath caught. She watched, unable to move as more drops fell. They landed in a strange curve. Then another beside it. Shapes formed, foreign yet familiar. They weren't letters she'd ever seen in her father's scrolls, nor symbols from the village's sacred texts. But she knew them. Not from memory but from blood. She reached out, trembling, and touched the mark. The stone pulsed faintly beneath her fingers. The lines glowed for an instant like fire under glass, then cooled into permanence. Footsteps approached. Amara whipped her head around, ready to hide, but it was only her grandmother, old Matsi, leaning on her stick, head wrapped in the blue cloth she always wore for mourning. She rarely spoke to anyone. Some said her tongue had been cut long ago for defying a chief. Others said she had swallowed silence by choice. But now, her cloudy eyes fixed on the stone. She shuffled forward and dropped her cane. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was the sound of thunder remembered in dry season. Low, raspy, undeniable. "It has begun again," she said. Amara swallowed. "You know what this is?" Matsi nodded slowly. "I've seen it once before. Your mother's blood wrote on the walls of our cooking hut the night before she vanished. I scrubbed it off with ash thinking it would stop. It didn't." Amara's voice shook. "What does it mean?" Her grandmother lowered herself beside her, knees cracking like old bark. She pressed a wrinkled hand against the letters. This is the old script. The one from before the silence. Before men rewrote law in ink and burned the drums. This script was never learned, it was lived. It comes from the blood of those born with memory deeper than bone. Amara stared at her. Why didn't anyone tell me? Because they killed the ones who could teach it, Matsi whispered. And because they fear what the blood remembers. She touched Amara's palm gently now. This wound will not close until the writing is complete. You cannot outrun it. I don't want this, Amara whispered. It doesn't matter. The earth does. Her grandmother pulled a strip of dark cloth from her satchel and wrapped the stone in it. You must hide this. Not even your stepfather can see it. What your blood writes, the earth remembers. If it falls into the wrong hands, it can be twisted. Rewritten again. That is what they've always done. Amara nodded slowly. What should I do now? Matsi met her eyes. Listen. To the wound. To the stone. To the soil under your feet. It speaks. The law isn't dead, it's buried. And you, child, you are the digger. A wind stirred the leaves. The stone seemed to hum within the cloth as her grandmother tucked it away in her basket. That night, Amara slept with her hand open and unwrapped, letting the blood fall as it would. No more shame. No more hiding. And in her dreams the letters danced. She woke with them etched behind her eyelids, laws unwritten waiting for breath. The air was thick with incense and pride as the villagers gathered beneath the full moon for the ceremony of renewal. Drums throbbed in steady rhythm, echoing through the clearing. Elders wore their finest robes, dyed in crimson and gold, and sat in a perfect circle carved into the red earth as they always had. The men chanted the sacred verses, voices rising like fire toward the stars. Women knelt behind them, silent, heads bowed. Amara stood among them, her hands wrapped tightly in cloth, trying to disappear into the rhythm of the crowd. But her heart beat faster with every drum. Her skin itched. Her palm throbbed. Something was stirring, deep and ancient. The ceremony had always felt hollow to her, just ritual and repetition. But tonight something in the air had teeth. Something in the wind knew her name. Her stepfather, Chief Nduka, stepped forward, raising the sacred staff of judgment. The village silenced. The circle awaited his words. Tonight, he intoned, we honor the circle of order. The balance of man over land. Of counsel over chaos. Of law over wildness. His eyes swept the crowd and paused just slightly, on Amara. She felt her blood turn hot. The ancestors look upon us, Nduka continued, and they demand that we hold fast to tradition. That we protect this circle from impurity, disobedience, and false voices. At that, the elders began to hum, a low tone meant to seal the night's power. But Amara's vision blurred. Her feet felt rooted. Her breath caught. And then she gasped. The cloth on her hand bloomed red. Blood, sudden and fierce, soaked through the wrapping, dripping onto the earth with terrifying speed. It pooled between her feet. She tried to step back, but she couldn't. Her knees locked. Her fingers twitched open. And her mouth moved on its own. Words poured out, not hers yet born from her. The language was old. Older than the village. Older than her stepfather's scrolls. It wrapped around the clearing like a vine. The words curved like roots, cracked like thunder, bloomed like truth. By stone and soil, by breath and bone, let the circle be broken. Where silence shackles justice, let fire speak. Gasps rippled through the gathering. A child began to cry. The elders rose to their feet, faces twisted in disbelief. Chief Nduka stormed forward, fury igniting in his eyes. Witchcraft, he bellowed. She speaks forbidden tongues. The gods never gave women such words. But Amara did not stop. She couldn't. The voice within her rose like floodwaters, each word breaking centuries of silence. She saw symbols in the firelight. She heard drums beneath the earth. She felt the law being rewritten, word by bloodied word. The circle was bent by lies, she whispered, falling to her knees. The laws erased were not of gods, but of greed. Let truth return even if it burns. Her stepfather grabbed her arm roughly, yanking her to her feet. You shame the ancestors. You desecrate our rights. I should have silenced you long ago. But his voice no longer held command. A woman stood. Then another. Then 5 more. Mothers. Daughters. Widows. One by one, they rose from the shadows behind the men and stepped into the moonlight. They looked not at Nduka but at Amara. At her glowing hand. At the blood on the earth that did not dry. She spoke the words my grandmother used to hum before bed, one woman whispered. I dreamt those same phrases last week, another murmured. but I was too afraid to tell anyone. I saw the same symbols written on the wall of the old well, said a third. They glowed for a moment, then vanished. The circle of elders stood frozen. They had never been challenged. Not like this. Not by women. Not by blood. Amara felt her body begin to collapse. Her legs gave way. Her vision flickered. But she was caught, held up gently by the hands of the women who had risen. We remember, one whispered into her ear. Her stepfather shouted again, calling for exile, punishment, silence. But the drums faltered. The elders no longer chanted. The circle was no longer whole. The soil beneath Amara's feet pulsed faintly as if in approval. The blood on the earth began to spread into shapes, spirals, branches, rivers. The ancient script again. The law she carried in her veins now painted the ground in glowing red. And the women watched. And they listened. And they did not kneel. Amara, weak but upright, looked at the broken circle of men, shaken, pale, silent now. The words had passed through her like lightning through old wood. The wound in her palm, though still open, no longer throbbed in pain. Something had shifted. The law had spoken, and the silence had cracked. Forever. The moon hung heavy in the sky, casting its silver gaze over the quiet village. But in the shadows beyond the huts and woven fences, something was stirring, something ancient and unrecorded. Amara sat cross-legged beneath the large Irako tree at the village's edge, its gnarled roots hugging the earth like the arms of a slumbering giant. Around her, women of different ages crept silently, gathering in a circle that grew wider each night. They said little, but their eyes told everything: hope, fear, remembrance. In her lap, Amara held stones, each one etched with glowing symbols that pulsed like a heartbeat. These were no ordinary markings. They were fragments of truth, pieces of a language long buried beneath centuries of silence and obedience. She had not carved them. The words had appeared on their own, as if summoned from the marrow of the earth itself. When the first word had emerged weeks ago, Amara had thought it a coincidence. By the third she knew it was a calling. The women came because something in them recognized the old language. When Amara spoke the glowing words aloud, it was as though threads were being sewn through generations. Grandmothers wept quietly, their fingers trembling as they reached toward the stones, murmuring names they hadn't dared to speak in years. Daughters listened with wide eyes, absorbing stories of the sky women, the river mothers, and the fire-bearers whose power had once shaped the land before they were silenced. The words on the stones weren't just history, they were rebellion in its purest form, inscribed in light and memory. As more women came, they brought offerings, herbs, charms, and relics passed down from elders who whispered that the blood had once written its own story. Some drew patterns in the dirt that matched the shapes on the stones, recalling fragments from bedtime tales they now realized had been warnings, not just fantasies. Others began to carry tiny stones with faint symbols tucked into their skirts and under their pillows, as if the language might protect them from what the village had become. But not everyone watched in awe. Amara's stepfather, Chief Baroka, peered from his compound with growing suspicion. Ever since the girl's voice returned, laced with strange tongues and unsettling calm, he had felt something shifting, something slipping out of his grip. His rule, once unquestioned, now bore hairline fractures. The men were restless. Their wives and daughters were too quiet, too knowing. His guards whispered of late-night gatherings and children repeating words that made the firewood crackle strangely when thrown into the hearth. Baroka summoned his council, though even they seemed hesitant. "She is poisoning the minds of our women," he spat, slamming a palm on the carved wooden table. "Writing is the work of men and scribes. These stones, these whispers, do you not see what she's doing?" One elder, a man whose daughter had not returned home the night before, shifted uncomfortably. "Perhaps, she is reminding them. Not poisoning." Baroka's eyes narrowed, his voice dropping to a hiss. "Truths that stir fire are dangerous. We have built peace with silence. She brings noise." Word spread quickly through the village. Amara was to be watched, her meetings curtailed. But the women knew better than to gather in obvious places. They moved to riverbanks, to forest clearings, and the shadowed corners of abandoned yam fields. And now it wasn't just the old who came, it was the young. Girls who had never known a world where they could ask questions were now repeating the old words under their breath. Boys, curious and confused, began to notice their sisters carried themselves differently, as if their spines had remembered how to stand tall. The stones themselves seemed to multiply. Each time Amara sat under the Irako, a new one would appear beside her, warm to the touch and humming softly. The words burned in different colors: amber, crimson, deep violet, and sometimes rearranged themselves when she blinked as though they were alive, choosing their moment to be understood. One night, a stone bore a phrase that made her freeze: "The wound that bleeds writes the future." She held it close, heart racing, knowing that something irreversible had begun. Barocca's paranoia deepened into rage. He accused his wife of attending the gatherings. When she remained silent, he struck her, though even that failed to restore the fear he once commanded. The next day she was gone. No one knew where she'd gone, but every woman seemed to walk taller afterward. His sons grew cold toward him, watching him with unreadable faces. One dusk, as Amara led a small group through a lesson of symbols by firelight, a girl no older than 10 stood up and pointed at a glowing word. "That one," she said, voice clear. "It means, we remember. My grandmother used to say it when she cried at night." The women around her nodded, some covering their mouths, others reaching for her hand. It was not just remembering, it was returning. The rise of the written blood was not an explosion. It was a steady drumbeat felt more than heard. It moved through the women's breath, their dreams, their footsteps. It leaked into the lullabies and the silences. It could not be caged and it could not be erased, not even by Barocca's orders, not even by the fire he eventually sent to destroy the Irako tree. When he came to the ashes the next morning, triumphant and breathless, he found another stone resting in the soot, still glowing, untouched by the flames. It bore only one word, etched in crimson light: begin. They came for her at the hour before dawn, the same hour he had dragged her out years ago, when the stars were still blinking and the world had not yet decided whether to wake or sleep. Back then she had been a trembling girl, barefoot and silenced, her voice caged in her throat like a trapped bird. Now, though her wrists were bound and her face marked with the red dust of accusation, she walked steadily between them. Her steps stirred memories from the earth. Torches flickered around her as the village gathered at the sacred rock, the place of judgments and curses, of oaths made and broken. The air tasted of smoke and dry leaves, and even the wind hesitated. Chief Barocca stood at the center, his robe heavier than usual, his eyes restless. He had summoned them all, for justice, he said. For order. For the restoration of peace. But the villagers knew peace had already fled long ago, slipping away like water through the cracks that had begun the night Amara's voice returned. She has divided the women from their homes. She has planted words where there was once obedience. Barocca's voice thundered across the gathered crowd. She speaks in tongues that no man can understand, and she carries stones that whisper blasphemy. Today we end this madness. Amara said nothing. Her gaze swept over the people, and for a moment, silence hovered like mist. She looked older than her years, wrapped not in fabric but in something deeper, conviction carved by pain, dignity soaked in memory. When they shoved her to her knees before the stone, she didn't resist. Her fingers grazed the cold surface, familiar in a way that stung. Barocca stepped forward, blade in hand. The same blade. The one he had used all those years ago to silence her voice by cutting into her throat, to mark her as cursed, to ensure she would never speak what she knew. He raised it again, not to kill her, no, not yet, but to draw blood once more as the ritual demanded. Let her confess before the gods, he said, and be judged. The blade kissed her skin and blood welled at the edge of the old scar. It dripped, thick and dark, onto the rock. The earth held its breath. Then the stone pulsed. What? Twice. A third time, and it split with a crack that shot lightning through the sky. Light erupted from the blood-stained surface, not white, not gold, but crimson laced with ancient blue, spiraling upward like smoke from a forgotten fire. The villagers gasped and stumbled back. Even Barocca dropped his blade, his mouth parting in shock. Amara did not move. Her blood, warm and steady, continued to feed the stone, which now pulsed like a heart woken from centuries of silence. And then came the voices. Not hers. Not Barocca's. Not of the crowd. But voices older than the trees. Older than the mountain. Older than even the first village drum. They echoed across the hills, rippling through the bones of the land, carried by a wind that remembered. Some were soft and mournful. Others roared like storms. All of them spoke in the tongue of truth. You who silenced the girl knew she bore our mark. You who wrote your laws in ash ignored those carved in blood. You who feared her voice feared your own shadow. Every man and woman heard them in their own way. To some, the voices sounded like lost mothers. To others, like the laughter of daughters buried too soon. The council elders fell to their knees, clutching their ears, their minds flooded with truths they had buried beneath decades of order and comfort. Even the children cried out, not in fear but in recognition. The words made sense to them like lullabies they had never been taught but somehow always known. Amara stood slowly, the ropes burned away by the light. Her voice, when she finally spoke, rang with the strength of 1,000 tongues. "You called this a trial," she said, the words sharp but clean. "But it is a remembrance. Not mine, ours." She turned to Baroka. He looked smaller now, not just in stature but in spirit. The air around him refused to carry his voice when he tried to speak. The stone pulsed again and another crack split it down the middle, revealing its hollow heart. Inside, more stones, each glowing with inscriptions. They hovered in the air before drifting gently into the hands of those who stepped forward. The women first, then the children, and even a few of the men. Each stone carried a word. Not random, not assigned. Chosen. One woman clutched hers to her chest and wept. A boy whispered the word on his stone, and a tree nearby bloomed out of season. A man knelt and whispered, "I remember," as if releasing a weight from his back. Amara stepped away from the rock, the blood at her throat now a thin line of light. "This trial is not mine," she said. "It belongs to the wound that was never allowed to heal. Today it bleeds light." No one could speak. Even the roosters, sensing something sacred, delayed their crowing. The sun began to rise behind her. As the first rays touched the broken stone, the markings flared brilliantly, then settled into a deep, steady glow. Not gone. Just waiting. The crowd parted as she walked through them. No guards dared restrain her. No elder dared speak. The law had been rewritten, not by decree but by blood. By truth. By voice. And from that dawn onward, no one forgot the trial that had begun with judgment but ended in awakening. They called her the blood scribe. It started as a whisper, a name passed between girls as they traced glowing symbols in the dirt, mimicking the sacred script they had seen pulsing in her palm. The name slipped past lips with reverence, not for the pain she had borne, but for what she had become. Amara, once a girl silenced by cruelty, was now a woman through whom law itself spoke. Her blood had once marked her as broken. Now it shimmered like fire under her skin, an unending testament, a living archive of truths too long buried. The cut on her palm never healed. It did not fester nor scar. It pulsed with ink, alive and warm, changing form with her emotions, responding to the unspoken needs of those around her. It was not a wound. It was a voice. And through it, justice no longer lived in scrolls or thrones, but in breath and memory. Amara never took a title. She claimed no throne, wore no crown. She didn't need to. When she walked into a village, people listened. Not because she shouted, but because the wind carried her name like a promise. Her presence did not command, it awakened. Women stepped out from behind walls they had been told were homes. Girls sat cross-legged around her, holding stones and questions. Old men bowed, not from fear, but because they saw something ancient and unyielding in her gaze. She taught, not just letters but liberation. She sat with girls beneath neem trees and guided their fingers over the glowing stones, repeating the same words until they glowed on their own. She taught them the language of the laws, not the laws of men but of balance, of restoration, of breath. She showed them how to speak not louder but truer. And when they asked about the pain, she did not lie. Yes, it hurt, she said. But silence hurt worse. She did not speak of revenge. She never spoke of Baroka again. Not because she had forgiven him, but because she had transcended him. His name no longer mattered in the world she was helping to birth. His chapter had ended. Hers was still being written, with every footstep, every story healed, every hand she held and reminded, "You were never small." The village that had once tried to burn her truth now carved her teachings into wood and stone. They painted them in dyes drawn from earth and leaf, and posted them not in shrines, but at riverbanks, marketplaces, doorways. Laws were no longer decrees, they were declarations of care. Children played near the trial rock now. It was no longer a place of fear. It had become a table where stories were shared, where disagreements were settled with memory, not might. No more screams rang out at dawn. No more cut palms sealed secrets. And still Amara walked. She journeyed from village to village, her presence heralded by nothing but the shimmer of script at her side. The ink in her palm would stir and flicker before she arrived, glowing in new patterns, warnings, truths, dreams. In one village, a woman chained in her hut saw the glyphs burning in the sky and knew that her silence was ending. In another, a boy taught only to strike his sister sat at Amara's feet and wept as the script on her skin spelled out a song he had heard in his mother's womb, before violence taught him otherwise. They came to call her many names. Blood scribe. Law walker. The flame that listens. But to the girl she taught, she was simply Amara, an older sister who had bled once and never stopped burning. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in ink and amber, a child asked her if the wound ever tired her. Amara looked at her hand. "It does not close," she said softly, "because the world has not finished speaking." "And will it ever close?" the child asked. Amara smiled. Not sadly. Not joyfully. But like someone who had made peace with fire. When every voice is heard. When no girl must bleed to be believed. That night, as she slept under the stars, a soft glow pulsed from her palm and drifted into the air. Villagers swore they saw writing dancing in the sky, verses shaped like birds, phrases carried by the wind, promises stitched into the breath of the earth. Some said the spirits wrote back to her now. Others said it was the earth itself, answering the law it had always known. But the truth was simpler. Amara had become what they had tried to destroy. Not just a girl, not just a voice, not even just a law. She had become memory incarnate. A record not stored in scrolls, but in breath and blood and the walking of bare feet over sacred ground. She was not justice written. She was justice walking.